Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to go over a bunch of tips and tricks that I've kind of picked up and learned throughout my lure making experience. I feel like there's a little bit of a lack of the tips for lure making out there, so I figured I'd make a video for you guys and hopefully some of these can help you out. So the first tip we're going to go over is what you use to stir your plastic. So the majority of us probably started with just a plain old butter knife. Now, as you see right here, the serrated portion of the blade, as you stir your plastic, that little section right there is actually going to cause some micro bubbles while you're stirring. So one way to remedy this is a cheese spreader. Now, this isn't something that I thought of. Adam over at SDG, I actually saw him using these to stir his plastic. You can see how it's smooth all the way around on both sides. So I searched for hours trying to figure out what these things are. So I sent him a message and he replied, it's just a cheese spreader. You can pick them up on Amazon. They work really, really well. They're nice and smooth all the way around. And you can see how it has a slight curve to it. That's perfect for trying to scrape the edges of your cup as you're mixing up your plastic. These work really well. The only area where these do not work well, if you're using a big Pyrex cup, when you go to stir this 4 cup, your fingertips are going to be right there at the top of the plastic, and I don't really want my fingers that close to the hot plastic. So you go back to your butter knife, and you could honestly use the butter knife in the way I'm about to show you and not have to buy those, but instead of using this edge, just use the bottom. The bottom of most butter knives are smooth on both areas, so you can just hold the top, stir, and you're not messing with putting those little micro bubbles based on this serrated edge. So hopefully this tip will help some of you guys out. These little cheese spreaders work great for the 1 and 2 cups, but if you get above a 2 cup to the 4 cup or bigger, I would probably stick with the butter knife and just use the butt end and not create as many bubbles. So there's tip number 1, and let's move on to the next. So this next tip is going to be all about blending blocks, whether it's the triple, the regular dual blending block, or a C block. So the problem with these is the C block not so much because you can inject this at higher temperatures, but for a double and a triple injection, you need the temperatures of your plastic to be as even and as low as possible. Well, the problem with that is you can see how small the ports are on this triple blending block. So where that comes into play is if you're trying to inject, here, let me actually have some. I was playing around the other day with some little triple injected stick baits. I got kind of a brown color on the top, a bright chartreuse in the middle, and then a green pumpkin on the bottom. So the problem with these are, you want to inject at the lowest temperature you can. Well, by the time your plastic travels through this long channel and comes out and goes through your mold, after you inject your first mold and try to go over to your second mold, most of the time this blending block has already cured and plugged up and you can't go on to your next mold. So the way to remedy that is to preheat your blocks. Well, what most people do is they'll take a heat gun, they'll kind of blast each little channel, they'll go do both sides of it, put it together. Well, what I found is it's really difficult to get consistent heat throughout each channel. So what I like to do is actually throw these blending blocks in the toaster oven, and I'll show you what I'm doing. All right, so for this one, I just take my whatever blending block I'm using, I'll throw it in my toaster oven. I turn it on about 350, and you can literally just turn it on for like 2 minutes. And just a couple minutes in that toaster oven will get the entire block heated evenly, and it's going to be more than hot enough to where all of your plastic will flow through from mold to mold and it won't stop up in the process. I picked up that tip when I was trying to make these little guys. So this is kind of a sexy shad pattern little swim bait. If you're only injecting like 1 mold at a time, preheating your block isn't going to be as critical unless it's a mold like this where you have individual top ports for each individual lure. So this is only making 5 swim baits at a time, but what I noticed specifically with the triple was by the time I got to the second port and then tried to go to the third, the blending block had already cured and I couldn't do anymore. And if any of you have ever tried making triple injection, it sucks. By the time you get all your plastic at even temperatures, everything's good to go. You want to go start injecting, you get 2 swim baits, and then the rest you have to redo it all because your block is clogged up. So preheating these blocks are very, very critical, and throwing them in the toaster oven I have found gives me the best results. So this next tip is the use of 3M double-sided tape. Now on the soft plastic side of things, this doesn't really do anything for you. However, if you're making jig heads and pouring lead, this is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated little tools that you can have when it comes to lead pouring, and I'll show you how. Alright, so this simple little tip with 3M tape, I feel like is probably the single most helpful thing you can do when it comes to lead molds. Now, I don't do this with all molds because some molds already center the hook for you. What I did with this one in particular, so you can see these big chunks of stacked up 3M tape down by the handles. I have the same amount, let me flip it over. So I have the same amount of layers on both sides of this. And then down across the bottom of the mold, I just have one strip, and I leave the tape on the top side, the red tape, because that'll keep anything from sticking to it. Now, this mold in particular, some of you probably picked it up already. You can see where I've cut these notches into the mold. That's for making spinner baits with this mold. Let me grab a wire form and a hook, and I'll explain how this 3M tape is beneficial. So when you're making spinner baits, you've got your spinnerbait hook and you've got your wire form. You're going to hook the hook on the wire form, and you can see the little grooves that I've cut in the mold. Now this particular mold is the Do-It casting jig, the only thing with modifying this mold to make spinner baits. So when you make this small 5/16 ounce, you can see the wire form goes into the collar on the 1/2 ounce size. I don't mind it because all I have to do when I make the 1/2 ounce, it's going to have a little bitty piece of lead sticking out. You just cut it off, file it smooth, you're good to go. But when you lay your wire form and your hook in the mold, let me get everything in place. So you can see the wire form is going to be held in place and perfectly straight by the 2 pieces of the mold coming together. Now the hook on this particular mold, if I don't have the 3M tape here, the tip of the hook will either rotate one way or the other, and it won't be perfectly centered in the mold. Now what this 3M tape does, 2 things. When you have one strip on both sides of the mold, it's going to keep your hook perfectly centered and in line with your wire form. And when you close your mold, since this tape has a little bit of, I guess you'd call it squishiness to it, it holds everything in place. Since you don't really have anything keeping your hook from moving, when you close this up and you just get everything lined up, close it nice and slow to where nothing moves, and that 3M tape is going to hold your hook perfectly centered and keep it from moving in any way, shape, or form. Then you can just pour your lead in your cavity, and you can see there the wire form is perfectly centered by the mold. Now for the 1/2 ounce size, if I go to move this over here, you'll see why I have this 3M tape down here on the handle. Let me scoot it over so you can see it. So for this one, when I get everything in place, I make sure my hook's nice and centered. If I didn't have this tape over here, this wire form would just be flopping around. So once I get everything in the mold where I want it, I take my offhand and just hold that wire form, close the mold nice and gently, and then what that does, again, it'll keep that hook nice and centered in your mold, but then also keep that wire form perfectly straight. So instead of having that wire form just flopping in this big gap over here, I stack up the tape will close, and it'll do the exact same thing. Nothing can move. The wire form is locked in place, the hook is locked in place, nothing's gonna move or shift. I can move it around as much as I want, and it keeps that wire form perfectly straight. This 3M tape works great for this making spinner baits, and then I have one other mold that I use it on, and I'll grab that and show you the second way. So this next part is really only for making these little jigs. So this is the little Kitech tungsten football jigs that everyone likes. These are the jigs that we make. So if I hold these side by side, they're virtually the exact same jig. The only difference is ours are made out of lead, theirs are made out of tungsten, but same overall size and profile. Now the way we make that is this jig, or this mold. Let me flip it around so you can read it. This is the weedless football jig from Do It Molds, one of the options. So they have a bunch of different football jig molds. So this one, you'll see how I have this 3M tape on the edges. Now this is a standard size weed guard that gets used in normal jigs. This is the weed guard that gets used in this mold. You can see how much smaller that is. Now the design of this mold is to lay your weed guard in the mold just like you would your base hole pen. Close it up, pour your lead. Your lead basically melts around the base of this weed guard and holds it in place. Now that works fine, but if you want to do powder coating the same way you would your other jigs, this gets tricky because you have to watch and make sure you don't melt your weed guard as you're heating up your head before you dip it in the powder coat. Then you're also going to get powder coat on your weed guard, and everything just becomes a little more difficult. So what you do, you go on Amazon, you can get a bag of these little pins, and they're 5/64. You just search 5/64 brass pins, you get a whole bag of them. You can see all these still have powder coat, I haven't cleaned them off yet. But you're going to take your pin, and you're going to lay this 3M tape. Let me get it up here. See, you can kind of see, let me hold it, find an angle there. So you can see that little groove on the 3M tape. What that is, when you put the tape on both sides of the mold, the tape is going to sink in to that little recessed portion of the mold and hold that base hole pin in place, perfectly centered in that cavity. So just like the other one, you're going to lay your base hole pin in there after you get your hook in place. You're going to close it up, and again, it locks it in place. It can't come out. It's going to be perfectly centered in your little cavity where your weed guard would be. After you pour your lead, you can do the exact same thing. You can powder coat it, take your base hole pin out, bake it, and then glue your weed guard in at the end and get the same result you would in a big jig, just in this small profile. So that is the second way you can use this little 3M tape. Yeah, I didn't really want to show you guys that trick just because this mold with all of these components to make that specific jig took me a very, very long time to make. But I'd like to help out as much as I can, and I figured why not. If you guys are curious what I use to make this exact jig right here, you get your small little weed guard. I'll link all of these components down in the description as well. I use the Owner 5316 in a 2/0 size. You can drop down to a 1/0 or even a number 1 if you want a tiny hook. The only thing with this one, the 5316, is a little heavier wire. You can see here it's the 2X strong, so the eye of the hook is slightly larger than what this mold comes stock, so you will have to route out your hook eyes just a little bit to make that hook fit. But it is a fantastic little like tiny compact jig. Highly recommend you guys give it a shot. But yeah, that's the second way to use this 3M tape. Now let's get on to the next one. This next one is core shot rods. So even if you don't have a mold that is a core shot mold, it's very beneficial to have some of these little core shot rods on hand. You can go to Angling AI, you can buy the core shot rods separate. They're not very expensive, and I think they come in packs of 5. So where this is very beneficial is, let me grab one of my colors real quick. So on some of your bottles of colorant, some of them that you don't use very often, your color will hard pack down in the bottom, and it's really difficult to get anything in the bottle to stir it up. So you get this core shot rod, you can take the lid off your bottle, shove this down in there, stir all that hard packed colorant that's packed at the bottom, stir it all up, give it a good shake, and you're good to go. The other really good use for this is if you have any interest in hand dipping tubes, you can actually hand dip little like crappie and panfish style tubes with these rods, and it's the perfect size. I don't have any on hand right now, but these little core shot rods, they're all going to be the exact same because they're machined down, and you can get very consistent results with just hand dipping little crappie tubes with this. You can make whatever color you want. I am not a huge fan of hand dipping. However, for just little small tubes like that, these actually work really, really well. For this next one, we're going to cover a couple different types of super glue that I recommend you keeping at all times. So the more common one that you're going to see is this, the super glue gel. What the gel is good for, it has these little squeeze tabs. You can squeeze very precise amounts. That's for gluing on eyeballs to jig heads and gluing weed guards into weedless jigs. That's the most common way you see this one. Now the one you don't see talked about very much is the brush and nozzle. So what I like using this one for, it has the brush applicator. And where this is very beneficial is you can actually hand tie little weed guards onto any hook you want. Now this one, if any of you are familiar with the Megabass Okashira head, they actually hand tie the weed guard onto theirs as well. You'll see a lot of guys take some pretty thick, like say 15-20 pound monofilament line. You can see how that one's a loop. And they'll actually tie weed guards onto hooks using some thick mono. Now I just use an actual wire weed guard on this one. So these Okashira heads, they're great. They have just a little blade on the head for little finesse swim bait applications, add a little bit of vibration. The only thing with these is they only come in a very limited amount of colors. So I looked it up, got all the parts to make my own, and this is how I make them. I put my the little cupped washers on there, put whatever blade you want in the middle, put another cupped washer with a bead on the back, and then I hand tie my weed guard. Now, to keep your weed guard in place, what I do is I take a little bit of this brush-on super glue, I put a little dab on the hook shank, I'll tie my weed guard wherever I want it, position it the way I want it, tie it on, and then I'll actually take that brush and brush over all of these threads and just lock everything in place. Because when you tie directly onto a hook, it's very easy for your thread and everything to twist and everything get all off center and out of whack. So you put just a little bit of that brush on super glue and it just helps lock everything in place. And then of course, when you're using little jig heads and swim baits, you can take either one of these, put a little dot of super glue right there when you thread your swim bait on, and it'll make it last a lot longer. So I'm sure a lot of you guys knew about this one, but I just wanted to touch on the uses for this little brush on. All right, so this next one is a very, very broad category. So it's cleanliness and organization. So as you can see, I try to keep my workbench, the area immediately that I'm working in, as clean as I can. I'll keep everything over here. So I have like all my powder coats down here. I have some custom powder coats down here. We'll touch on that in a minute. Try to keep all of my glitters, all of my pigments, extra mica powders, some of the extra powder coat that I have over here. I keep all my lead molds up here. All these little pins along the bottom are for hanging up baits like this. I keep my injectors up there. These are all just different jig heads and things that I'm working on and testing. But you want to try to keep everything nice and organized. And then for your extra material, I'm going to show you guys a few different ways that I like to organize mine, such as jig skirts and a few other things. And I'll show you guys that right now. So this first one, I'm going to show you guys how I store all of my skirt material for making jigs. So these are actually photo box holders. They're meant for like a 4x6 photo. You can get these at Hobby Lobby, probably Michael's and other craft stores. So these things go on sale all the time. If you look up these and they're full price, don't buy them. Wait like a week or two, they're going to go on sale. So you can see I have all of my boxes numbered, and where that's very beneficial is, so I think I have 64 boxes total because I have 4 of these big ones. When you're making jigs for somebody, say somebody wants this specific black and blue color. What you can do, if you're writing down what exactly you made them so you can duplicate it, instead of having to write the entire name of the skirt color, you can just label everything by number. So if I make a jig for somebody and they use a very specific color pattern, I can look at my little note card and I see, okay, 10, 5, 15. I can go right back to those boxes, get that exact jig color, and duplicate everything. And it's a lot easier than trying to write out the name of the entire patterns. And then the other thing I do, let me grab one of these. What I like to do on these is in the bottom of the box, I keep the package, if I can get one out. So I keep the package of where I bought this color skirt, and then most of them will have the item number and the color on the back. If not, I'll write it on the bag with a Sharpie, put a piece of tape on it, do whatever you want to do. So that way I know if I start getting really low on this color, I just grab my bag, because I get skirts from several different companies. So if I want this exact one, I just look at my bag in the bottom of the box. I know where I got it from. I've got the part number, I've got the name of it, and I can get the exact same skirt pattern without having to try to look up where I got it from. So that's how I like to keep my skirt material. I've found this to be by far the most efficient way to do it. Let me know if you guys have a better way, but this is how I keep my jig skirts. So along the same lines of jig tying materials, you can see here this is a 12-inch by 12-inch storage case. Same thing, you get it from your local craft store, wherever. But these, I like to keep all of my marabou plumes and whatever I need for hair jigs or fly tying, and it keeps everything nice and neat. I have a couple of these boxes that I just keep all of this stuff in, because if you've ever worked with any sort of marabou or hair, it gets everywhere. So I like to keep these, they're nice and small and flat, so I can stack these on top of each other. They don't take up a lot of space, and it keeps all of this contained and nice and organized. And then we'll move on to hooks. So what I like to do for hooks, my wife actually found this rack and all these containers at IKEA. I keep all of my hooks in these individual containers. So like this one, I can pull it out. I see that as a Mustad 32886 and a 4/0. I keep them all in little bags so they're not just loose hooks laying around. I have all my different sizes of hooks. You can see down here, these are all my spinnerbait hooks. These are swivels. This is just a random assortment of goodies. Got buzzbait blades, more buzzbait blades, spinnerbait blades, beads, wire forms, and then all my extra hooks. This has been the greatest thing for hook storage. You can see over here some of these bags of some of the special hooks that I like to keep on hand. These are the Owner Deep Throat 2/0. I have all my different sizes hung up over here. I think I have 1/0 through 5/0. But as far as hook storage, this has been by far the best thing that we have found for keeping them. As you can see, the board is actually rather large. And you can buy additional containers and organize this however you want. I've got this little tray right here. I've got the little hook rack in the back. You can get different accessories and customize this to your liking. But this is how I keep all my jig hooks, and it has been the best way for me to organize everything. And then while we're on the same topic of all of my jig tying stuff, so this little box, I have my little vise, which I can actually clamp right here to the edge of my workbench, keep all my loom products, my weed guards, my scissors, keep my bobbins, all my different bags of thread for whatever I need. And then all of this stays up here in the top. And then underneath all of this, I have some miscellaneous little fly tying. These are little cricket legs. And then the main thing I use down here is I keep all of my living rubber bags. But just keeping everything, got a spare bobbin down in here for in case one breaks, or if I don't want to swap out a bobbin for a new color, I can just grab one of these. Got some extra little thread and stuff down there, but this is just a great way to keep all of your, because some of this stuff like your vise and your bobbins, some spare skirts you got laying around, some of this stuff is just kind of scattered everywhere. Well, it still looks scattered in here, but it's contained. And what's nice about this little kit is I just throw the lid back on it, close it up, and I can carry it wherever I need to go. Great little box. All of these boxes, these clear boxes you're going to see like this, I've picked up at either Hobby Lobby or Michael's. Some of these craft stores, these little boxes that they make, are great for lure making supplies. And last but not least for jigs, I pick up a bunch of these boxes also from craft stores because they're about half the price of actual lure boxes. And I just keep little pre-made jig heads, whatever it may be. So these little poison tail jigs this is a new hook that I'm testing out. So I just have a bunch of spares made up. Some of these jigs are ones where if I was making some for somebody, you can see this one has a big bubble right there for the powder coat. I'm not going to sell that to somebody. There might be a minor defect in it, so I'm going to keep this for myself. That's not going to affect anything, but I wouldn't sell that to somebody. So I keep all of my extra jig heads, and I've got several of these boxes for different styles. You can label the top of it. I know this isn't what's actually in here because I've rearranged my boxes a few times, but you can label the top based on size and whatever you need. Got some of my bigger jig heads in here, and you can keep everything contained because a lot of these loose hooks and stuff, they end up everywhere. You're going to get hooked on stuff, they're going to fall out, you're going to lose some. This is a great way. I would not buy actual tackle boxes for this because these little boxes from craft stores are way cheaper. Alright, so down here underneath my storage rack, I have this shelf, the bottom shelf up just high enough to where I can take one of these big plastic totes and slide it up underneath. So this is all remelt that I don't really like the way it looks. It's been reheated. It's got every flake imaginable in it. However, where these old pucks like this come into play, every time I get a new mold, I reach into this box and I reheat and use this plastic to make the first run in the mold. Or say you're troubleshooting a mold and you're going to constantly be shooting plastic. Keep some of this old plastic that maybe you don't really like the color of it. Keep this stuff for testing new molds, troubleshooting molds, and learning like your mold's tendencies. The reason those red ones back over there are in a bag, that is bleeding red pigment, so I don't want that to bleed and turn this entire box red. But it's really good to keep just some of your old scrap plastic together. I like to keep a lid on it because where I live it's very dirty and dusty, and it'll keep all the dust off of the plastic. But when I'm done, slide it up underneath my shelf, it's out of the way, and I still have that plastic for whenever I need. Alright, and then for my good plastic, I like using these smaller boxes and kind of color coordinate them. So I got all my browns over here, got my greens, got blues, purples, a little bit of pink in there. I like to keep these color coordinated in these smaller boxes, and these boxes also work really well for like storage for random things. So I have a bunch of spinnerbait and buzzbait wire forms in here. These little packs of eyeballs just go everywhere, so I like to keep them in these little containers just to keep everything nice and together. Got some stickers down in there, but all these little boxes, and the other great thing about them is they stack really well. So I can put all my lids on. I have several of these boxes for all my different color groups for plastic. You can keep everything stacked on your shelf, nice, neat, and organized, and it keeps all the dust and dirt and debris out of them. So if you pour lead, you probably know that after a while, the inside of your lead pot can get pretty dirty looking around the edge. So as I mentioned before, where I live, it's very dry and dusty, so just dust settling on this, and then I start it back up. The edges of your pot get pretty nasty. So the easiest way that I found to clean this, turn your pot on, get one of these little ingot molds, pour all your lead in these little molds, or in the ingot mold. You'll get all these little ingots that you can again remelt. What I highly recommend when it comes to cleaning this, and you're probably going to think you might think it's silly that we do this, but the best way to clean this, just buy a new one. You can go to Lee Manufacturing. I'll have their website linked down below. This brand new pot, $13. So, as you know, lead can be very dangerous. Really, the only way to clean all that stuff out is to take a wire wheel or something along those lines, drain all your lead, and then grind all that stuff out of there. Well, you can wear a respirator and grind all that stuff out, but you're still going to risk all of that dust getting all over the place, contaminating everything, and I don't want the lead poisoning to be a factor. For $13, I'll just buy a new one. I bought a new rod as well, just because the total price for a new pot, a new rod, and shipping was under 30 bucks. $30 is more than reasonable for me to not have to deal with grinding away all that lead, spending hours and hours trying to clean that. I would much rather just get a new one. Your health is worth the $30 to just buy a new pot and a new rod. You can clean it, however, just get a new pot. So a lot of these companies use these little red caps on these lids. I'm sure you've seen in some of my videos where I'd be adding color, go to mix it up, and I would just have a green all over my hand. You can see here I have color from something I've touched today. These little red caps, because what a lot of us do, we put our finger on the cap as we shake it. Well, that pressure from holding our finger on that cap will cause it to split and bust open. These little replacement caps are super cheap. You can get them in. You can even get some of these on Amazon. Super cheap. I keep a stack of them laying around. That way when stuff like this happens and I have a cap bust and get pigment everywhere, I just throw the cap away and get a new one. Then this all kind of goes back to what I talked about at the beginning about cleanliness and organization. Just eliminating stuff like this, where you don't constantly have to be wiping your hands off or getting your pigment all over your stirrer and your Pyrex cup and all over your table and everywhere. These things are so cheap, it's easy to just take it off, throw a new one on. I'll link some of these down below, but you can get them just about anywhere. All right, when it comes to powder coating, if you do a lot of powder coating and want to do custom work, get a jar of this clear powder coat. So this 1 pound jar is going to last you for a very, very long time. So there's 2 ways you can use this. First one, just take the clear powder, take whatever glitter you want. You can add glitter to clear powder, and then what you do is you heat up your jig head, you dip it in whatever color you want. So say for instance we have this blue and we have a black powder coat. Dip your jig into the black powder coat, then take some blue flake, add it to clear powder, and then reheat your jig a little, dip it in the clear powder and the flake, and you can add a different color flake to any jig that you want. Now what I do, I will dip the jig head into whatever powder coat that I'm doing, and I'll bake it, and I'll get that part out of the way, and then I will dip the cured, hardened, powder coated jig head into my clear and my glitter, and I don't bake it after the fact, because some of these glitters do really well, some of them do not. So I haven't tried it with this one in particular. You'll have to play around and see what works for you and what doesn't, but I have tried some cheap white glitter. Actually, I have it right here. So I bought some of this. I had a customer want to know if I could add white glitter to a jig head. So I took this just cheap. I think I got this at Walmart. Took this white glitter, put it in some clear powder coat. When I tried to bake this, it burnt. Like the color, it was not white. It was like brown and orange and everywhere. So you have to play around with what you can and can't get away with. Now, the other thing you can do, you can take some of this clear powder, put it in a cup, take a mica powder, any mica powder that you want. So what I have found to be best, start with about 8 parts of clear powder to 1 part powder. And then you can add powder, like add a little more mica powder to it to get a stronger, more vibrant color if you want. But I try to always start 8 to 1 with clear Protect and whatever mica powder I want, and you can mix your own custom color. This is one that I mixed up. You can see that what looks like glittery effect, that's just the pearl of the mica powder. So you can mix your own. These little containers, also get these from craft stores. If you've ever powder coated spinnerbaits, actually, let me grab one. So if you've ever powder coated a spinnerbait, you know how much of a pain it can be. You can see this one did not fill in all the way, so that's why it's still sitting up here. Well, when you go to powder coat, you can't fit your whole spinnerbait down in a cup. Like, it just doesn't fit. So you can get these little containers for multiple reasons. Adding glitter, mix your own color, like your own custom color powder coat, or put your powder coat in here, open this little lid that you can sprinkle the powder out, and after you heat your jig, you just sprinkle your powder onto your spinnerbait. Just put a piece of paper underneath it. Once you're done, take your paper, these lids pop off, fold your paper up, dump it back into your cup, and you're not going to waste any. These things come in packs of, I think, 6 for just a few dollars. Great to keep around for all 3 options. Adding glitter, mixing your own, or I use these a lot for powder coating spinnerbaits. The other tip for powder coating, get a cheap paintbrush. So what I do, I like to take ones that are real fanned out like this. I actually have a video where I demonstrate using that. I'll have it linked down below as well. I like to take one that's really fanned out, just smash it on the table, get it nice and fluffy. And then what you can do is after you dip your jig head in the first powder coat, let me grab, actually, since it is 4th of July weekend, this is one that I made last year. So you can see the jig head is red, white, and blue. What I did on this one is I take my white powder coat, I heat up my jig head, I dip it in the powder like normal, then I'll take my brush, I'll dip it in the blue powder and sprinkle it on the bottom. You can literally just blow on this brush and all that powder will blow out. Flip it over, heat the top of the jig head, dip it in my red, sprinkle that on, and then you can get multicolored powder coat. You don't need a nice brush. I got this in a pack of like 20 for a couple bucks. But get one that's nice and fanned out. It's really thin. You can see there's not a lot of bristles, because if you get too many bristles, it likes to add too much powder and it'll clump up and give you inconsistent results. Just one like this is what I found to work best. Hopefully this helps you guys out. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know if any of these tips help you guys out. Do you think any of these are going to help you out in the future? Which one of these that we went over was your favorite? Do you like these tip style videos? Let me know if you want to see more stuff like this, or if you just want to stick to just regular lure making. Out of all the tips that we went over today, which one do you think is the most beneficial, and which one are you going to try to implement into your daily routine? I really like to hear all the feedback from you guys. Let me know what you guys think, what direction you would like to see the channel moving. And I just can't thank you guys enough for all the continued support and positive feedback. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next one.